She was 8 years old, sitting behind a sofa, drinking a juice box. He was the most feared man in Seoul, watching $4 billion disappear in real time. And when 17 of the world's highest-paid hackers failed to explain what went wrong, she laughed at them. Not because she was brave. Because the answer was so obvious, she couldn't help it. But before that laugh changed everything, before the most dangerous man in South Korea would bow his head to a child whose mother cleaned his floors, you need to understand exactly what was at stake in that room. Not just the money. Not just the vault. What was really at stake was the kind of thing that doesn't get discussed in boardrooms or court documents. The kind of stake that makes men disappear. Stay with this story. Because the next 30 minutes will rearrange something permanent inside you. Chairman Seoul had never once raised his voice in his adult life. Not when his competitors lost their licenses under circumstances nobody investigated too carefully. Not when 3 journalists covering Vipra Holdings simultaneously and quietly retired. Not when his own blood came to him at 2 in the morning, begging. He had simply looked at them all with those flat, patient eyes and waited for the situation to resolve itself in his favor. It always did. Seoul had built Aegis Systems from a modest surveillance startup into the most feared AI security infrastructure in Asia over 14 years. Governments ran his biometric locks on their most sensitive facilities. Private hospital networks across 6 countries processed patient logistics through his algorithms. The Korean Stock Exchange's entire high-frequency trading operation breathed through code his engineers had written. He was not simply a powerful man. He was the invisible skeleton that powerful institutions wore inside their bodies without ever acknowledging out loud. Which is precisely why, when Aegis collapsed, the ground moved under everyone. It began at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. That specific hour when the world is distracted and mistakes metastasize before anyone notices. The biometric vault system at Vipra Holdings' underground facility in Gangnam executed a command it had never executed in 6 years of flawless operation. It sealed. Not with the clean, purposeful certainty of engineered precision. It sealed the way a drowning man seals his fist around something that cannot save him. Desperate, total, and completely beyond reason. 7 men were inside that vault when it happened. Their names exist in no public record. Their presence in that building on that night will never appear in any official document. But Seoul knew exactly who they were. He knew what they controlled. He knew the specific and very permanent ways they expressed disappointment when men they trusted failed them. The clock on his phone read midnight when Vipra's stock dropped 11%. 1 a.m. 19%. By the time Seoul's financial markets opened that morning, $4 billion had been erased from Vipra Holdings' valuation. 6 hours. $4 billion. And 7 men in a sealed vault who were running out of patience at a rate that made the stock price feel like the smaller problem. Seoul made 4 phone calls. Within 90 minutes, 17 specialists were moving through the glass corridors of Vipra Tower toward the penthouse on the 53rd floor. They came from Singapore, Berlin, Tel Aviv, and Seoul's most prestigious institutions. White-hat hackers whose names appeared in cybersecurity journals. Systems architects who had been flown in on private jets to fix problems that governments refused to admit existed. They carried laptops worth more than most people's annual salaries, and wore the specific brand of confidence that comes from being told you are the best often enough that you stop questioning it. They filled the penthouse with the sound of keyboards and urgent Korean, and the occasional burst of English technical vocabulary that was meant to signal competence to anyone listening. None of them noticed the child behind the sofa. Zora was 8 years old and she had been invisible in that corner for nearly 2 hours before the first specialist walked through the door. Her mother Tosha had not intended to bring her. The plan had been a babysitter, a normal Thursday night shift, and Zora safely at home watching cartoons. But the babysitter had cancelled 38 minutes before Tosha's shift began. And working for Chairman Seoul's household staff meant that the sentence, "I cannot come in tonight," was not a sentence you were permitted to construct. Not if you wanted to still have a job, and the very specific, very critical benefits attached to that job by morning. So Tosha had done what mothers backed into impossible corners have always done throughout the entire history of impossible corners. She had made it work. She had settled Zora behind the large cream sofa with a tablet loaded with cartoons, headphones, 2 juice boxes, and a negotiation. The negotiation was simple. Stay invisible. Make no sound. Do not, under any circumstances, draw attention to yourself. Zora had agreed completely and sincerely. Zora had also, somewhere deep in the second hour, grown bored of her cartoon. And when Zora grew bored, her eyes moved, the way the eyes of children who think in systems always move, looking for patterns to examine, structures to pull apart, problems to quietly and privately solve. The holographic display dominating the center of the penthouse was impossible to ignore. The code architecture projected across it was something Zora had seen before. Not in a classroom. Not in a textbook. On her tablet, in the forums she visited when the cartoons lost her attention, in the late-night rabbit holes she disappeared into while Tosha thought she was sleeping. She recognized it immediately. She also recognized, with the clean and merciless clarity of a mind that had not yet learned to be polite about other people's errors, exactly what was wrong with it. She did not mean to make a sound. But when Dr. Kwon Tae-jun, KAIST graduate, lead architect, the man Seoul was preparing to pay $50 million, pointed at the screen with his laser pointer and announced to the room with the full weight of his 17 years of experience that the vault failure was the result of a zero-day exploit executed by a foreign state actor. Zora's scoff came out before she could swallow it. Small sound. Quiet room. It landed like a blade on glass. If you already suspect what Zora saw on that screen, type it in the comments. Let's see who figures it out before she says. He was 8 years old. She had juicebox pulp on her lower lip. She was also, in this moment, the most dangerous person in the room. Seoul's eyes had not moved from the sofa since the sound escaped. He set his glass down on the table beside him with the kind of deliberate slowness that his staff had learned to fear more than shouting. The 17 specialists had gone quiet. Not because they understood what had happened, but because they understood, with the instinct of people who had spent time around powerful men, that something had shifted in the atmosphere of the room and the correct response was stillness. Tosha's cleaning cloth had stopped moving. Her back was to the room. Her shoulders were perfectly straight. She was doing the thing she had trained herself to do in the 14 months she had worked in this building. Converting terror into posture, feeding the fear downward into her feet so that her face, if anyone looked at it, would show them nothing they could use against her. Tosha. His voice was the same temperature it always was. That was the thing about Seoul that his staff found most destabilizing. Anger would have been easier. Anger was readable. Anger told you where the edge was. Seoul's voice never changed, which meant the edge was everywhere, always, and you never stopped walking toward it without knowing. She turned. Chairman. Is that your child behind my sofa? 1 second of silence. The kind of silence that contains an entire calculation, every exit, every consequence, every version of the next 5 minutes mapped and discarded until only one remains. Yes, Chairman. My childcare arrangement fell through. I should have informed you. I take full responsibility. Seoul looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he looked back at the sofa. Bring her here. Tosha crossed the room. The specialists parted without being asked. She reached behind the sofa and found Zora already standing, tablet tucked under her arm, juice box in hand, watching the holographic display with an expression that Tosha recognized and dreaded simultaneously. The expression Zora wore when she had already solved something and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Zora. Tosha's voice was low, controlled, carrying everything she could not say out loud wrapped inside her daughter's name. Come here. Be small. Do not be what I know you are right now. Zora looked at her mother. Then she looked at Seoul. She walked forward. Seoul studied her the way he studied balance sheets, looking for the number that didn't belong, the figure that disrupted the pattern. An 8-year-old in his penthouse at 2 in the morning was already an anomaly. An 8-year-old who had scoffed at his lead architect's $50 million diagnosis was something he didn't yet have a category for. You think Dr. Kwon is wrong. It wasn't a question. Zora looked at the screen. Then back at Seoul. I think the vault isn't broken. The temperature in the room dropped another degree. Dr. Kwon Tae-jun made a sound at the back of his throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite contempt, but the sound a man makes when he is deciding whether something is worth his attention. He decided it wasn't. The system failure is the result of a sophisticated state-level intrusion. The diagnostic alone took my team 4 hours to. You're telling the gate to be open, Zora said, and then asking if it's closed. Silence. The logic gate. She pointed at the screen. Her finger traced the line of code that Dr. Kwon's laser pointer had passed over 17 times in the last hour without stopping. Right there. You used a single equals sign. That's a command. You're telling the system to set the value. But in the next line you're asking the system to check the value. It's reading its own instruction as the answer. It's not confused because someone broke in. She paused. It's confused because someone made a typo. Nobody moved. Dr. Kwon's jaw tightened. That is an extraordinary oversimplification of a. Can I fix it? Zora asked. She was not asking Dr. Kwon. She was asking Seoul. And Seoul, who had not survived 14 years at the intersection of legitimate business and illegitimate power by being slow, had already made his decision before she finished the sentence. He looked at the nearest technician. Give her the access terminal. Chairman, I must strongly object. Dr. Kwon stepped forward. This is a classified infrastructure system, allowing an unauthorized. You have had 6 hours. Seoul's voice remained exactly the same temperature. She has had 6 seconds. Step back. The technician slid the terminal toward Zora. She set her juice box down on the edge of the console. Tosha winced, pulled the keyboard toward her, and typed 4 keystrokes. A single operator. The equal sign that was commanding became the double equal sign that was questioning. Command became query. Instruction became interrogation. She hit enter. The vault lock indicators across the entire status board cycled. Amber, 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 and then, one by one, shifted to green. The system performance metrics in the upper right corner of the display climbed. 30%. 38. 45. The vault locks reset with a sound like the building exhaling. From somewhere below them, deep in the infrastructure of the building, came the distant mechanical percussion of 7 heavy bolts retracting in sequence. 7 men were about to walk out of a room they had been trapped in for 6 hours. $4 billion had not come back. But the bleeding had stopped. The room was completely silent. Seoul looked at the screen. Then he looked at Dr. Kwon Tae-jun, 17 years of experience, KAIST graduate, $50 million, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The metrics on the screen said everything. Seoul then looked at Zora, who had retrieved her juice box and was watching the green indicators cascade across the board with the calm satisfaction of someone who had known the answer before they were asked the question. What else do you see? Seoul asked. And that was the moment everything changed direction. Because Zora didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head at the screen. Her eyes moved across the network architecture map that had just populated in the upper panel. The full Aegis system, all divisions, all nodes, all running on the same codebase, all built by the same academy, all taught by the same flawed syntax. She saw it immediately. The vault had been the smallest problem in the room. This isn't just here, she said quietly. This pattern. It's everywhere. Seoul stepped closer. Show me. Seoul did not frighten easily. He had survived a hostile takeover attempt that involved 3 shell companies, a forged government audit, and a man who later vanished from public record entirely. He had sat across negotiating tables from people whose smiles meant violence and matched them expression for expression until they blinked first. He had built an empire on the principle that information was the only currency that never devalued, and that the man who controlled the information controlled everything downstream of it. But watching an 8-year-old navigate his entire network infrastructure with the casual fluency of someone reading a familiar book, that produced something in Han Seol's chest that he did not immediately have a name for. It felt uncomfortably close to fear. Zora had pulled up the hospital logistics network first. Not because Han Seol directed her to. Because the architecture map had populated across the screen in a branching pattern, and her eyes had simply gone to the largest node after the vault system. The way water finds the lowest point without being told to. She traced 3 lines of the logistics code, found the same command versus query confusion embedded in the medication dispensing algorithm, and flagged it in under 90 seconds. If this fire's wrong, she said, not looking up. A hospital tells itself a medication has been dispensed when it hasn't. Or tells itself it hasn't when it has. She paused. How many hospitals? Han Seol looked at his operations director, a lean man named Director Beck who had the permanent expression of someone calculating how much trouble he was currently in. Beck checked his tablet. 47 licensed facilities across Korea, 2 in Singapore, 1 in. All of them, Zora said. Same error. Same line. Same pattern. She had already moved to the next node. The high-frequency trading algorithm took her 4 minutes. Longer than the vault, longer than the hospital system, because the trading code was layered in a way that was clearly designed to look more complex than it was. Zora worked through it the way she worked through everything, methodically, without impatience, her juice box forgotten at the edge of the console. She found the flaw buried in the 7th conditional loop, the same single equals sign masquerading as a question when it was actually a command, and flagged it without commentary. Then she sat back and looked at the full architecture map and said something that made the room go very still. Someone taught everyone in this company the same wrong thing. Han Seol's eyes narrowed. Explain. These errors aren't random. Her finger traced the branching nodes across the display. Vault system, hospital logistics, trading algorithms, 3 other subsidiary networks she hadn't even opened yet. Random mistakes look different from each other. These all look the same. Same position in the code. Same type of error. Same logic. Every single system. She turned to look at Han Seol directly. Where do your engineers learn to code? The silence that followed was a different quality of silence than the ones that had come before it. This one had weight to it. This one meant that someone in the room already knew the answer and didn't want it spoken out loud. It was Dr. Kwon who spoke first, and the fact that he spoke at all, after the vault, after the hospital network, after 45 minutes of watching his entire professional reputation quietly disintegrate, told Han Seol something important about the man's remaining options. The Aegis Academy curriculum was designed by my department. It has produced over 300 certified engineers in the last 6 years. Its methodology has the same error in every course module, Zora said. She had pulled up a secondary window on the terminal. The Academy's published training documentation, publicly accessible, indexed and searchable. She found it in less than 2 minutes. The Foundational Syntax Module. Page 1. Line 7. It's been teaching engineers to write commands when they mean to write queries since the first version of the curriculum. She looked at Dr. Kwon with an expression that contained no malice whatsoever, which somehow made it worse. Every engineer your academy trained learned to make this mistake on purpose. They thought it was correct. Dr. Kwon's face had moved through several colors in the last few minutes and was currently settling on something between white and gray. Han Seol looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked away, the executive dismissal, the gesture that meant you have become temporarily irrelevant to me, and turned his full attention back to Zora. And that was when Zora found the ghost. She had not been looking for it. She had been running a network-wide diagnostic, flagging every instance of the flawed syntax across all Aegis systems, building what was becoming a genuinely staggering catalog of structural errors, 900 and counting, when a partition in the trading algorithm's back-end returned an access response that didn't match the system's stated architecture. She frowned, pulled the thread. The partition was small, deliberately small, the kind of small that was designed to look like routine system overhead rather than intentional construction. But it was there, nested inside the trading algorithm's deepest operational layer like something that had been carefully planted and then carefully hidden, and it was doing something that no legitimate system petition should ever do. It was transmitting. Not processing. Not storing. Transmitting. A continuous low-volume data stream that had been bleeding outward from Vipra Holdings' core network to an external address for. Zora checked the timestamp on the partition's creation log and felt the number land in her chest like something cold. 18 months. There's something else, she said. Her voice had changed. Not frightened. Zora's voice did not do frightened, but careful in the way that voices become careful when the thing being said cannot be unsaid. There's a hidden partition in the trading system. It's been sending data out. Continuously. For a year and a half. The room stopped breathing. Sending where? Seoul's voice was exactly the same temperature it had always been, but something behind his eyes had shifted, the quality of attention that a predator focuses on something that has just moved unexpectedly in the dark. I need 2 minutes to trace the endpoint. Zora was already typing. That was when Dr. Kwon moved. Not toward the terminal. Not toward Seoul. He moved toward Zora, 3 fast steps across the console space, his hand reaching for her shoulder with the specific energy of a man who has just realized that the next 2 minutes will end his life as he knows it, and has decided that stopping the 2 minutes is the only available option. Seoul's security moved faster. 2 of them materialized between Dr. Kwon and the console with the practiced efficiency of men who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. Dr. Kwon stopped. His hand was still extended. He looked at it as though it belonged to someone else. Seoul looked at him for a long time. Sit down, Tae-jun. It was the first time Seoul had used his given name all evening. In the specific social grammar of Korean professional hierarchy, that shift meant something precise and irreversible. It meant the distance between them had collapsed, not into warmth, but into something far more dangerous. It meant Seoul was no longer speaking to an employee. Dr. Kwon sat down. Zora had not stopped typing. The 2 minutes she had asked for became 90 seconds. The endpoint address resolved through 3 layers of routing obfuscation, each layer peeled back with the focused patience of someone who found this kind of puzzle not threatening but interesting, until the final destination address populated on the screen. Zora stared at it. Then she looked at Seoul. Do you know a company called Meridian Consolidated? Seoul's expression did not change, but his right hand, resting on the console beside him, closed very slowly into a fist. Meridian Consolidated was not a foreign government. It was not a rival technology firm. It was not a cyber-criminal syndicate operating from a server farm in Eastern Europe. It was a competitor. A domestic one. The kind of competitor that had appeared seemingly from nowhere 18 months ago, undercutting Aegis on 3 consecutive government contracts with bids that were, everyone had noticed, no one had said out loud, suspiciously precise. As though someone had told them exactly how low Aegis was willing to go before it walked away from a deal. As though someone on the inside had been feeding them the numbers. Seoul looked at the timestamp again. 18 months. The ghost signal had started feeding data to Meridian Consolidated exactly 6 weeks after Seoul had promoted his chief financial officer to a seat on the executive board and given him unrestricted access to every division of the Vipra network. The false peak of this investigation had just collapsed beneath everyone's feet. This was never about a hack. It was never about a foreign government. It was never even really about the typo. The typo was a symptom. The real disease had been feeding quietly in the dark for a year and a half, disguised as incompetence, protected by complexity, invisible to every expert in the room. Invisible to everyone except a child who wasn't supposed to be there. Seoul made one phone call. He did not explain himself to the person on the other end. He did not negotiate. He simply gave an address, a name, and a time. Then he ended the call, set the phone face down on the console, and turned back to the room with the expression of a man who has just signed a document he cannot unsign and has decided to feel nothing about it until later. The name he gave was CFO Lim Dae-sung. Lim Dae-sung was not in the penthouse. He had not been invited to the crisis meeting, a decision that Seoul had made instinctively at midnight without understanding why, the way the body sometimes knows things before the mind catches up. He was in his apartment on the 31st floor of a building 4 kilometers away, and he had been awake since the vault failure, and he had been watching the Vipera stock price on 3 separate screens with the specific vigilance of a man monitoring the consequences of something he had set in motion. He did not know that an 8-year-old had just pulled his name out of the dark. Back in the penthouse, Seoul looked at Zora. "You said 900 errors." 914, Zora said. "I flagged them all. The patch sequence is ready. It just needs to be executed in the right order, or the systems will conflict during the reset." "How long?" She considered this with the seriousness of someone who did not give estimates they couldn't defend. "If nobody interrupts me, 4 hours. Seoul looked at his watch. Then at the window, where Seoul's pre-dawn skyline was doing what it always did, burning quietly, indifferent to the disasters of the people inside its buildings. Then back at Zora. "Nobody will interrupt you." He looked at Director Beck. "Get her whatever she needs." Beck blinked. In 14 years of working for Seoul, he had been given many instructions. This was the first time he had been asked to serve a child. "Sir, yes. Of course." He looked at Zora. "What do you need?" Zora thought about it. "Something to eat. Not spicy. And can someone charge my tablet? The cartoon I was watching isn't finished." Somewhere in the room, someone made a sound that was almost a laugh and then immediately decided against it. Tasha, still standing at the edge of the room, felt something shift in her chest. Not relief, because relief required safety and she was not safe yet, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the first breath after a long time underwater. Seoul looked at her. "Your daughter is working. You should sit." It was the closest thing to kindness she had ever heard in his voice. She did not trust it completely. But she sat. The next 4 hours were the most productive hours in Vipera Holdings' operational history. Zora worked through the network with the same systematic focus she had brought to every system she had touched that night. No performance, no drama, no awareness of the 17 specialists sitting around the edges of the room watching her with expressions that ranged from stunned to professionally humiliated to something that looked, in the case of 2 of the younger engineers from the Seoul office, remarkably like awe. She executed the patch sequence in precise order. System by system. Node by node. Each correction small, surgical, and absolute. The hospital logistics network stabilized at 3 a.m. The trading algorithm cleared at 4:17 a.m. The subsidiary networks fell into alignment one by one like dominoes, finding their proper orientation for the first time. Not falling, but standing, clicking into the upright position they had always been designed to hold. By 5:43 a.m., 914 errors had become 0. By 5:44 a.m., Vipera Holdings network was running at a level of operational integrity it had never achieved in its entire existence. And at 5:45 a.m., Zora navigated back to the ghost signal partition, the one that had been bleeding data to Meridian Consolidated for 18 months, and prepared the final patch. This one was different from the others. The others had been corrections. This one was a door being closed. And closing it would trigger something that Seoul had already set in motion with his one phone call, because the patch was designed to do 2 things simultaneously. It would sever the transmission. And it would freeze every account connected to the receiving endpoint at Meridian Consolidated, including the private accounts that had been accumulating the financial benefit of 18 months of stolen intelligence. Including the account registered to a numbered company whose beneficial owner, after 3 layers of corporate obscurity, was CFO Lim Dae-sung. The ghost signal had never been about espionage. It had never been about technology or rivalry or corporate warfare in any meaningful sense. It had been about money, the oldest and least complicated motive in human history. Lim Dae-sung had used the command versus query errors that Dr. Kwan's academy had seeded throughout the entire Aegis network as a private accounting system. The errors created gaps. The gaps created invisible spaces. The invisible spaces became containers for redirected funds. $500 million, moved in fragments so small and so consistent that they looked like routine system noise, invisible to every auditor, every compliance review, every security assessment that Han Seoul's own company had conducted on itself. Invisible because the people conducting the assessments had been trained by the same academy that built the errors into the foundation. The entire architecture of incompetence had been load-bearing. It had been holding up a theft. Zora looked at Han Seoul. Her hand was on the enter key. He nodded once. She pressed it. For 3 seconds nothing visible happened. Then the ghost signal partition flatlined on the monitor, the transmission indicator dropping from its steady 18-month pulse to 0 with the abruptness of a light being switched off. Across the city, in an apartment 4 kilometers away, 3 screens simultaneously displayed account freeze notifications in the specific red-bordered format issued by financial regulators acting on law enforcement instruction. And in the lobby of that building, 2 elevators were already rising with people who had badges and the specific patient energy of professionals who had been waiting for exactly this signal to move. Lim Dae-sung had 40 seconds between the moment his screens went red and the moment his door opened. He used them to sit very still and understand that it was over. Han Seoul watched the transmission indicator hold at 0 for a long moment. Then he looked around the room, at the specialists, at Director Beck, at the 2 security men who had stopped Dr. Kwan's reach toward Zora 3 hours ago, at Dr. Kwan himself, who was sitting in the chair he had been told to sit in and had not moved since. He looked at Tosha, who was awake and straight-backed and watching him with the carefully neutral expression she had worn all night. Then he looked at Zora, who had pushed the keyboard back to its original position, retrieved her juice box, and was looking at the now clean network architecture map with the calm satisfaction of someone reviewing completed work. Han Seoul did something he had not done in front of his staff in 14 years of building an empire. He bowed. Not deeply. Not the full formal bow of supplication. But a genuine, deliberate inclination of his head toward an 8-year-old girl, a gesture that every Korean person in that room understood with absolute precision, because in the specific social grammar they had all grown up inside, a man of Han Seoul's position bowing to anyone was not a small thing. It was the largest thing. It was an acknowledgement that could not be taken back. Zora looked at him. Then she bowed back, with the careful correctness of a child who had been taught that respect, when it is genuine, deserves a genuine answer. The room exhaled. Han Seoul straightened. Name your terms. Zora had thought about this. Not tonight. She had been too busy tonight. But in the weeks before tonight, in the late hours when Tosha thought she was sleeping and Zora was reading about systems and networks and the structures that held things together or failed to, she had thought about what she would do if she were ever in a room where someone powerful asked her what she wanted. I don't want money, she said. I want the academy reopened. The real one. Not the one that teaches people to make the same mistake forever. A real one. In my neighborhood. Free. For kids who can't afford to be wrong. Han Seoul looked at her for a long time. And my mother, Zora said, doesn't clean floors anymore. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something settling into its correct position, the click of a lock that has finally been given the right key, the sound of a system that has just been patched running clean for the first time. Han Seoul looked at Tosha. Something moved across his face that his staff had never seen there before and would spend years afterward trying to describe accurately. The closest any of them would get was this. He looked like a man who had just been asked a question he did not know the answer to, and had discovered that not knowing was not the disaster he had always believed it would be. He looked back at Zora. Done, he said. 3 weeks later, in his office on the 53rd floor, Han Seoul sat at his desk after his last meeting of the day and did something his assistant had never seen him do in 6 years of working for him. He sat without working. He was looking at a photograph on his desk. New, unframed, slightly imperfect in its composition the way photographs taken quickly and genuinely always are. Zora and Tosha, standing in front of a building in a neighborhood that Han Seoul had visited once in his life and would now visit regularly because a new academy with his funding and her name on the curriculum was being built inside it. Zora was not looking at the camera. She was looking at something to the left of it. A screen, probably, or a system, or a problem that had caught her attention. Her expression was the one Han Seoul had first seen over the back of a cream sofa at 2 in the morning. The one that meant she had already seen the answer. He thought about what she had said to Dr. Kwon in the simplest possible language, the language that cut through 17 years of credentials and $50 million of misplaced confidence and got directly to the thing that was actually true. You're telling the gate to be open, then asking if it's closed. He had spent 14 years building an empire on commands, on directives, on the architecture of telling. He had surrounded himself with people who were paid to execute instructions and trained to never question them. And in doing so, he had built the most sophisticated and the most vulnerable system imaginable. A system that could not ask itself whether it was right. Power, he was beginning to understand, was not the ability to give commands. It was knowing which questions to ask. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in the specific and humbling way that the most important lessons tend to arrive, the person who knows which questions to ask is sitting behind your sofa, drinking a juice box, waiting for someone to finally listen. If this story hit something in you, if Zora made you feel something you didn't expect, then this channel is exactly where you need to be. Every story we tell is built to do what this one just did. Subscribe right now so you never miss what comes next. Hit the like button if you stayed until the end. It tells us you want more stories like this one. And drop a comment below. Tell us what moment got you. Was it the scoff? The bow? Or the moment Zora said she didn't want money? We read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because some stories don't just entertain. Some stories remind you what it means to be seen.